Good morning, Whale Coin Talk community. My name is Noah. I'm very excited here to be with David from the Klaytn ecosystem. Klaytn's a layer one blockchain that is catering themselves as a blockchain for metaverse builders, a metaverse of the future. So before we get started, David, do you want to give us a quick background of who you are and how you got to be in the crypto space today, and more specifically, how you got to be working with Klaytn?
Yeah. So my name's David Shin. I'm based in Singapore. I've actually been in crypto for about 10 years, 10 plus. I started out in 2012. I was one of the first ASIC miners. And then I transitioned into looking at Ripple and helping Ripple pivot away from their strategy of setting up XRP gateways around the world and really then focusing more in on using Ripple as a backbone to go up against Swift. So Chris Larson and I were still, in touch with each other off the back of that. Um, I also introduced Chris and Ripple to Matthew Mellon, who is someone in New York, a very prominent guy. Sadly, he passed away in 2018. He was quite actively involved with Ripple as well. I'll let your audience Google all that if they want more details. And from there, really just experimented on a lot of new chains that came out. I was one of the first master nodes that set up on Darkcoin, which is now called Dash. As most of your audience will know, Darkcoin slash Dash was the very first proof of stake. And so it was incredibly fascinating. So I wanted to test that out. And so I set up masternodes, which were validators for that. Also helped in contributing and giving some guidance around their governance model. As your audience will know, Darkcoin was one, or Dash was also one of the first to come up with a governance model for their chain. And just really the last 10 years have really touched a lot of the core layer ones. And in 2019, yeah, I decided to retire from my day job and go full time into crypto. I was an investment banker for almost 20 years, and I was basically doing what I call the Bruce Wayne Batman thing between 2012 to 2019, where I was, kind of the banker during the day, and then at night doing a lot of crypto stuff because I found it was really cool and I love the community. And again, people can Google my name, David Shin, and Bitcoin. They'll see I was in a lot of various different media platforms talking about my life as Bruce Wayne and Batman. 2019 came around. I decided enough is enough, going full-time Batman. And started helping my friend Roger Ver set up his Bitcoin.com exchange. So I helped set that up and then handed it off to the team that we hired, and then moved on to work for Tezos. Tezos asked me to come in and restructure Asia for them. So I did that, reestablished a new entity for them out of Singapore called TZ APAC, which is a prominent Asia team at the moment. And I would say around April of last year, I got a call from one of the co-founders of Kakao. Kakao is like the WeChat of Korea for audience members who don't know Kakao. 95% of the population of Korea is on a chat application called Kakao Talk. And Kakao back in 2017 decided that they wanted to get into the blockchain business. So they formed a team, created a subsidiary, and they started developing Klaytn, which is their blockchain. Klaytn went on to mainnet in 2019. It's a fork of Ethereum with the modification around the consensus algorithm. It's a proof of stake rather than proof of work, and a few other bells and whistles that got embedded into Klaytn to differentiate us from Ethereum at the time. So things like 1 second finality on the confirmation side. We're currently at 4,000 transactions per second. We're working towards 10,000 by the end of the year. And we are probably the cheapest, if not one of the cheapest EVM chains out there. So that went live in 2019. And again, one of the co-founders of Kakao, the parent company, called me around April of last year and asked me to come and help globalize Klaytn. Because from 2019 to 2021 last year in April, before they called, most of the liquidity and adoption was coming out of Korea, both for developers, users, and investors. And so they wanted my help to come and globalize it. And so Since August, I officially joined, and right now my role, my official title is Head of Global Adoption for Klaytn. As a part of my journey here so far over the last 10 months, I've helped them set up a new entity in Singapore to be able to start pushing out the global strategy from this entity here in Singapore. I've hired a team in Singapore as well as rebuilt a team in Korea. And really, my team, again, we focus in on global adoption, developer, investors, and users.
Beautiful. And so, David, it sounds like you've had quite the lucrative career, not just in crypto, but as an investment banker. I'm not quite sure how you have the time to do all of that and more. But jumping into Klaytn here, are you able to kind of describe some distinguishing features that Klaytn and the ecosystem offers in contrast to a lot of popular layer ones that we're used to working with today? It sounds like you have quite a bit of experience with all of that. So, can you give us a quick breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, we're not really that different and we don't want to be from Ethereum. So what I mean by that is in March of this year, we announced to our community and to the general public that we were going from being EVM compatible to Ethereum equivalent, which means that, basically from an engineering perspective, DNA wise, we're exactly the same as the latest version of Ethereum at the core at layer one. And really, our focus is then trying to create value at layer two. And what we do in terms of adding value is we create service chains at layer two, and we attract large gaming studios to build their own side chains on top of us. And so, we're going to continue with that strategy. Essentially, what we're saying is that we believe that Ethereum at the core is the predominantly strongest sort of in the ecosystem. And so, particularly, out of all the different EVMs that are out there. And so, we're just going to take all the engineering glory that's being given to us from the Ethereum core developers, and we're gonna essentially take that and leverage that and focus more in on layer two development. So, um, to answer your question in short, we are different, but we're the same. And we're purposely designed that way in order to ensure that we create as much ease as possible in onboarding developers, but also to enable that we can tap into the EVM liquidity that's out there.
Understood. And are there any, well, I want to jump into your hub and spoke model here in a moment, but a few questions before that. Uh, are there easy ways to migrate over from Ethereum and other layer ones to Klaytn? You guys have a native bridge? Are you using bridges like Synapse? How can we go about getting our liquidity over?
Yeah, so there's the liquidity for investors and users and holders, and then there's the development side. So we use something called ENS, Ethereum Naming Service. So that allows basically anyone who is building on Ethereum to integrate into our chain very easily. You can reuse all your APIs, everything can just come over pretty easily. So I just wanted to touch on that part. But to your question about on the actual investor or holder side, we have bridges that we've built. We've also partnered with Wormhole, and we have other third-party bridges that are already there. So we have something called Orbit Bridge that it's been the more popular bridge used to bridge assets over from not just Ethereum, but other EVM compatible chains as well as other non-EVM chains. We just recently, as of a couple of weeks ago, I believe, if not last week, announced our the work that we've done with Synapse. So Synapse is also integrated, so that's another bridge. As I mentioned, Wormhole, open source bridge that we have built, and we are actively looking for operators to help us operate some of the Wormhole bridges that we're working on. So that's on the bridge side. Sort of at above the network, we have various different dexes where you can kind of swap out wrapped assets. So for instance, I guess if you want to really break it down, you can essentially use Clay Swap or some of the DEXs that we have in our ecosystem to be able to swap assets. We have a project called Change. That's Chainge. So Chain and then GE app. Really, really technically advanced application developed by some really good engineers out in Eastern Europe. It does atomic swaps. So again, you can have exposure and access to other assets swapping Clay into, whether it's Ethereum or, Bitcoin or what have you. So there is a wide array. There's more that I can talk about. There's Klaystation as a DeFi app. That's another large DeFi app on our ecosystem. And there's many others, Cocoa Finance, that you can take a look at. What I would recommend is people, if they're interested in seeing the ecosystem map, to go to our website, which is Klaytn.foundation, and you can take a look at all the different players in our ecosystem there.
You described the importance of Ethereum equivalence in the beginning, and you explained some ways that you guys are going about doing this, such as like development tools, API integration, core development contribution. Um, I read on the white paper and also on your website that you plan on enabling EIPs and KIPs to contribute to both ecosystems. Can you kind of give us, our audience, a high level overview of why that matters and why that's so important for not just Ethereum, but Klaytn as well?
Interoperability, specifically within the EVM um, region, so to speak, of blockchain, is very important to us. Because for one, we've committed to Ethereum equivalence. And number two, because we strongly believe that Ethereum 2.0, when it gets there, is going to be the winner. Okay. So from that standpoint, we take a strategic view of where we think Ethereum as a whole will where it will land. Uh, but on top of that, the fact that most of the liquidity for assets that are, whether they're NFTs or fungible assets, a lot of the liquidity is really coming out of EVM chains. And so we want to be able to create enough interoperability, not just below the network, but also above the network, so that the ease and the frictionless process of having people go in and out of various different assets feels almost like you're using email, right? I mean, I shouldn't have to go through extra hoops just to send a Gmail to, let's say, a Yahoo Mail account, just because they're on different servers. If we standardize the protocol and let's say we call it SMTP, then I should be able to send things through regardless of whether it's Outlook or Gmail or Yahoo. And I think really that hits the crux of why we feel it's so important to come up with more and more standards around this stuff.
And with that said, are you guys planning on working with popular DeFi applications like Aave and Curve and have them expand to Klaytn? I see that oftentimes um, when a new layer two or a new layer one launches, let's say Polygon and Avalanche, C chain, for example, a bulk of the liquidity, or people are very eager to move over massive amounts of liquidity when Aave or Curve are integrated into the new layer one or layer two.
Yeah, so we definitely are. I mean, Uniswap is one that we're actively sort of engaging. But the one thing I would say, Noah, is we also take a view that the current DeFi environment is probably slowing down a little bit given the
Mhm.
events that we've seen over the last 3 months. And therefore, do we want to over accelerate our exposure to um, allocating more and more resources into that part of our ecosystem? The answer is yes and no. So what I mean by that is we already have a pretty thriving DeFi ecosystem. Before all these events occurred and before the winter really hit us in January, we had about 2 billion of TVL locked in
Mm.
Klaytn. Uh, DeFi is a big thing in Korea in particular, which is a regulated market, just as a reminder to your audience. But, again, looking ahead and given the headwinds and the uncertainty, we as an organization or a foundation have to look at where to best place our resources and where to best grow the ecosystem. And at this stage, we are doubling down from our pivot of last year, where we started looking less at DeFi and more at gaming, more at metaverse, and more at the creator economy use cases. And we're doubling down on that. And the reason for that just simply is because, in case, anyone who's listening is interested, is because, regardless of whether there's a winter or whether, DeFi is in a situation where it might get regulated, having very, very good games on chain will always attract users and always generate network traffic, which creates a more stable environment for the demand and supply of clay as well as other assets that are in the ecosystem. So
Uh,
really what I'm saying is like we're trying to move away from working in an environment where there's more speculative value being created and really transitioning into more utility value.
I couldn't agree with that sentiment more. I mean, I think DeFi is here to stay. Maybe not the kind of DeFi we saw in 2020 and 2021. With that being said, I believe that the next big wave of liquidity and the next big wave of hype in this space um, is going to be pushed by metaverse, but more specifically crypto gaming projects that are already building in
Agreed.
the space. I couldn't agree with
Right.
that sentiment more. And I like your vision of branding Klaytn as a metaverse blockchain for all. And I would love to know more about the comprehensive package of tool sets that your ecosystem will provide in order to make building for the metaverse, and I'm assuming building for crypto games, easier than ever. Can you give us a high level overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are working on creating developer toolkits. And that includes everything from SDKs to, building more open source around APIs, but just making sure that the onboarding of the developer journey or experience is smooth and easy. And so with that, we've got a whole slew of documentation that if there's developers on, listening today, if they're interested, again, you can source that through our website, Klaytn.foundation. But essentially, at a high level, as you asked, we're really looking to create much more open source developer toolkits and giving that to our community. In addition to that, as a foundation, we're also funding more open source infrastructure ourselves. And so we have, again, put some investment into the relationship for Wormhole to ensure that we have open source bridges available. We've created our own open source DEX. And the reason for that is we see, DEX as being interesting infrastructure for things like GameFi. So as we see the buildup and the advent of more high quality GameFi assets, they're going to have to be that liquidity will have to be pooled somewhere, and we see DEXs rather than centralized exchanges being a much better venue for that. And to create open source environments and to implement that is really at the forefront of where we see the things happening in our ecosystem. So yeah, for much more of the developer journey in terms of what we offer and how our packages work, I would recommend for people to go to www.klaytn.foundation to take a look.
Um, and what level of programming proficiency does one actually need in order to utilize your end-to-end library of standardized contracts?
Yeah, at this stage, it's probably not at a level where a Web 2 guy developer can just come and start building Web 3. But that's our goal by the end of the year. So again, we're working on developing a lot of toolkits that are really getting rid of that brain damage that is there for a lot of Web 2 developers to come and start building on Web 3. And to help that journey, again, it's not just onboarding them easily, but and onboarding means things like using languages that are convenient, that majority of the development world understand, but also ensuring that we have the right set of tools that are easy to use, but more importantly, easy to integrate into whatever libraries they've developed or other SDKs that they have created. We need to make sure, and we are looking at ways to create ease of integration as well.
Beautiful. And is there going to be a cost for using these tools? Is it going to be in the form of Clay? Will developers have cloud access to these tools? Give us some more insight on that, and if you can, please.
Yeah, so that it's all open source, so there's no cost. And in terms of, you mentioned the cloud, we actually have partnered with some of the biggest cloud providers. I won't say who at this stage, but I'm sure people can assume there's only really three large ones. So two of the three we're heavily in bed with. And through those relationships, we are able to give opportunities where they can redeem some of the costs that are required. And in fact, we ourselves at the foundation offer grants for developers to build and integrate into Klaytn. So there's multiple ways for people who are engineers to consider coming into Klaytn and having subsidized funding for that, whether it's through some of our partnerships with cloud providers providing redemption coupons, or directly through us giving them grants to integrate. And again, a lot of that information is sourced on our website.
David, what would you say some current hurdles blockchains, or excuse me, what would you say some of the current hurdles are that blockchains face in serving as a critical trust layer for the metaverse? And uh, in addition to what you've already explained to us so far, what would you say that Klaytn is doing differently?
Very good question. Thanks for asking that. I mean, I hate sort of mentioning names and doing comparisons, but I think people naturally ask. The biggest challenge I have for someone who's been in blockchain and crypto for 10 years is, how do layer ones scale without sacrificing too much gas costs or other constraints? Because the resource demand that'll start coming as we get more into developing sophisticated dApps, right? So if you think about games, if we go from very simple games like Axie Infinity and we move towards more, you know, um, open world, more sort of competitive multiplayer games, those two scenarios require different amounts of resources from a network, right? It's pretty simple. But assuming that we move away from playing Tetris and we go more towards Fortnite,
Mhm.
then you got to think about what kind of issues this might create for layer one chains in terms of uptime and maintaining a certain level of service level, in terms of the chain. So we think about that a lot. We see other chains having outage issues. We see other chains having potential migration risk problems. So, there is a very well-known layer two chain out there that's EVM. They're currently bolted onto Ethereum. Uh, and when Ethereum flips over to Ethereum 2.0, I think people who are on that chain should ask themselves what happens,
Mm.
right? For anyone who's worked on a migration project, whether it's in your traditional Web 2 world or Web 3, it is a ginormous undertaking, right? So to port everything over, I mean that is a ginormous undertaking. So, and then in addition to that, in that particular scenario, when you think about the roll-up solutions, whether it's uh, optimism or whatever it may be, do you really need a layer two option at that stage for Ethereum 2.0? So all these questions, I don't know if people are addressing or if they want to address at this stage. But if I'm building something big, I'm going to need stability and not have outages in 1 year. I'm going to need to have some questions answered by the engineering community around what they're going to do once there's this migration issue. Um, and so there's several of these problems that are out there. I think others face challenges that are more tied to creating regulatory problems if they're out there marketing and promoting too much. So we're a little bit different, and here's why, right? So this is to the second part of your question. We're different because we are backed by one of Korea's largest companies called Kakao. Again, for your audience, if you don't know Kakao, Kakao, please Google it. I believe we're about an $80 billion market cap company listed on the Korean Stock Exchange. And again, 95% of the population of Korea is on our chat application. And Kakao has many, many businesses that bleed into the everyday lives of the average Korean person. And in addition to that, Clay is integrated right into Kakao Talk. So we have a natural advantage in that we have the Kakao relationship, but also in addition to that, we are operating in a regulated market. Korea is a regulated market. So everything we do is very transparent. Um, there's less of that regulatory overhang risk that maybe others face. But we also have brought in a lot of the Web2 engineering pros and cons into building Web3. So, as I just alluded to, when you have 95% of one of the largest, countries in Asia on a network, and, that's been sort of running for the past 10 plus years, and there's been zero problems. There are lessons there that we're definitely going to bring in terms of the scale problem for building a network for Web3.
Mhm.
And last but not least, Noah, the one thing that footnote that's worth highlighting, as we work more and more bringing Web 2 into Web 3 and creating that conversion, because we at Klaytn believe this is fundamentally the key in growing adoption from here, not fighting for more of the crypto degens and crypto native people. It's really about, if we want mass adoption as an industry, how do we convert Web 2, not just the users, but developers as well, into Web 3? And with that, we feel that Web 2 feels comfortable working with us because of our Web 2 experience and what we bring to Web 3. So all those things really differentiate us.
I love that. And lots to unpack there. I want to stay focused to be cognizant of your time, David. I feel like you and I could probably go on multiple tangents based on what you've just described. Um, I wanted you to give us a high level overview of Klaytn's tiered structure, and also wanted to talk about how one could set up a node and validate transactions on your network.
Sorry, the first part of the question was tiered structure?
Oh yeah, so I read something about Klaytn's tiered structure. I'm not entirely sure what that meant, so I wanted to see if you could unpack that for us. And I'm not sure how it related to setting up a node and validating transactions, or if those two are just mutually exclusive entirely.
Sure. Well, let me talk about how the validation and how that works. So in terms of building applications on top of our network, we're completely open source that way. So any developer who knows Solidity or Python can come in and build. Um, Below the network, in terms of validators, we are what we call quasi-private. And so what I mean by that is we're set up kind of like how Facebook Libra was going to operate, in that we have governance council members. We've got about 30 to 35 of them at the moment. We're adding and subtracting as we speak, and so we're looking to get to about 50 by next year. But these are 30 to 35 of some of the largest companies in the world, including LG. I'm sure your audience know LG if they have TVs or fridges or phones or computers. We have WorldPay, which is a big payment processor out of the US. We even have Binance Global as one of our validators. Um, and we have Gumi, which is a big listed gaming company out of Japan. We have Netmarble, which is a big listed gaming company in Korea. So, I mean, lots and lots of Web 2 experience in the traditional corporate sense are validators. And the reason why we went down this road is pretty simple. Um, we we took the view that when it comes to validating transactions, that we needed something that was a little bit more quasi-private than completely open and public. Primarily because if you are looking to convert Web 2 to Web 3, there will be certain Web 2 transactions whereby the Web 2 company may not want that publicly broadcasted across the whole network. And so therefore, when I was at Tezos, how we solved that problem was we would whitelist validators and push through a certain segregated group or set of transactions through that whitelisted group of validators, which effectively is the same thing as having a quasi-private group of validators. So we've just taken that and expanded it and really made it, our model across the whole chain. Um, in order to become a governance council member or a validator, it's not easy. And this is where it becomes more private than public. So you need at minimum 5 million clay, which, with the winter market, it's getting cheaper, but you need 5 million clay, and you need to have 80% quorum amongst the 30 to 35 governance council members voting you in. Once that happens, then you can set up. If you have your own capabilities to be able to run the node and the validator, then we provide some level of technical support, but we leave it to the various different players to do that. Otherwise, we have partners that we use to run validators as a service. So those are the two options that we currently look at. But yeah, we run a quasi-private validator network.
So playing devil's advocate here just for a moment, doesn't doesn't that make the distribution of validators a lot more centralized than we would want in a decentralized network?
I guess, how do you define decentralized, right? I mean, to
Mm,
me, I think there's pros and cons to being 100% decentralized versus, let's say, half decentralized. So if you look at centralization, it's just one large monolithic player that's kind of, running the network. In the case of cloud, it would be like Amazon, it would be Google, GCP, or it could be Azure for Microsoft, right? Um, then there's like complete decentralization where anyone can be a validator as long as for proof of stake, as long as you have the minimum amount of assets to be able to stake it into the network. At Tezos, it was a very low amount, so anyone could be a validator, right? And then there's something in between where, what's the right number of validators to ensure that there's still strength in the network, but it's not completely decentralized, that you could have validators being set up in North Korea or Iraq
mm.
or other areas that may detract us from pushing that conversion of Web 2 to Web 3, right? So it's a bit of a fine line. Honestly, Noah, I think for us, we felt after many iterations of thinking about this, that the best way to do this was to be quasi private, right?
Mhm.
In that, you can't, no one is stopping you from coming in as a validator. It's just the barriers are a lot higher. So there's no guarantees, whereas the barriers for entry for a completely open network like Tezos is really low. So anyone can set that up.
You mentioned that your governance council has between 30 to 35 members. How many of those are DAOs?
Yeah, none of them are DAOs, but we're moving in a direction where we'd like to set up a DAO structure for our governance council. So that's a great question. It's very timely, actually. So with our, quasi-private validation network, we feel that we can create some level of distinction by um, at least leveraging some of the decentralized governance and implementing that into the 30 to 35. Eventually, we're going to move to around 50, but with our community of validators. And so our what we call our Klaytn platform team, They are responsible for things like the governance council members, strategy, tokenomics. They are working actively at the moment to speak with our governance council members as well as our community to come up with the right balance and how we can do that.
Understood. So I wanted to move on here and ask you about what decentralized governance societies are all about and how that fits into Klaytn's governance model and what it means for the future of the crypto space.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Vitalik's been recently talking about soul-bound tokens and decentralized societies as sort of the next evolution of where we're going with a lot of this technology in Web3. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, and at Klaytn, we've been thinking about a lot. We're creating a lot of these digital environments, these virtually persistent environments that are up and running 24 by 7, 365 days a year, whether they're gaming environments, whether they're trading environments, and eventually whether they're interactive environments in the metaverse. And we think about behavior um, because we are in an industry where anonymity is common. We are in an industry where there's a lot of trolling, a lot of bad behavior. I think all of us here, including your audience, can attest to this on Twitter. I'm sure at some stage someone's gotten involved somehow. And really, when we think about the next generation, right, Noah, like your future kids, your future grandchildren, my future kids, future, like what kind of uh, digital environment are they going to live in? What kind of behavior will be tolerated and won't? And so with that, at Klaytn, we really think about how do we evolve the current state of play and how do we leverage the current technology stack to change and evolve in a good way the current state of how people behave online. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about, or I've been thinking about and discussing with various different thought leaders and groups in the industry and community is looking at, back in 2013, there was this concept of colored coins that sat on top of Bitcoin. For those of you who are, who were back in the day involved with Bitcoin, you'll know that you'll remember this concept of colored coins. So colored coins sat on top of Bitcoin and they represented different things, right? So by having that concept and bringing it into our ecosystem, could we somehow govern behavior without creating a centralized um, player that manages all that? Right. So if you think about today's world, if I'm on Twitter, we all I think we all can agree, all 345 participants on this AMA, that it's probably not the right model that Twitter can censor people from what they'd like to say. But on the same token, someone has to kind of police really bad behavior, unless we all embrace toxic behavior online, which I don't think we would as a society. So if that's the case, if you take away that central Twitter figure, is there a way to come up with a decentralized society where we can all police ourselves? And what are the tools that are required to do that? Then we now introduce the colored coin concept. And this is something, again, we've been playing around with this idea with various different thought leader groups and community members. But what if you were to have sort of like a green, yellow, and red token? And each time there's good behavior, you're rewarded with a red token, right? And these tokens are not assets. They are, let's say, non-fungible NFT tokens that represent sort of rewards, right? Um, and so you're given green every time there's good behavior by community members who feel like you're contributing or you've made some, comments that are very nice. And then you're given, let's say, red every time there's really toxic bad behavior. And yellow are warnings, and a certain amount of yellow is being given automatically convert into reds. And by accumulating red and green tokens, you can effectively then create social credit in a very Web3 way. because the whole community is now self-policing through this incentivization mechanism of the colored tokens. And you can use that then for implementing DAOs and creating much more effective DAOs. Today, the biggest problem with the DAO is you get a bunch of people, and Telegram, if you're not looking at your Telegram, you're going to miss the vote, right? So I think the incentive to vote is off with the current DAO model. But if you have people who are, let's say, voting who have a certain substantial amount of green tokens, then I think there's much more civil sort of responsibility. There's more incentive, and we weed out those who have a lot of the red tokens from being able to participate in things like this. In addition to that, it opens up the possibility of, DeFi in a sense that we have much more securitized credit. Okay, so would I be willing to lend to you more because your wallet holds more green tokens than red tokens? Absolutely, right? Because there's a certain amount of persona and behavior there that I think could bleed into your behavior and possibly how you pay back loans. And so, it really does then, it's all theoretical at this standpoint, but it really does tie into, what Vitalik's been talking about with the soulbound tokens and decentralized societies and how we get there and how we incentivize, um, community members to self-police without having to have some central figure police behavior.
So a few questions from my end. One, with this kind of pseudo social credit system, uh, could we see something? I don't like to refer to Black Mirror, but can we see something where it kind of goes off the rails and gets out of hand, where um, people are kind of inflating each other's ratings or even teaming up? And let's say that, I don't know, let's say that you and I are competitors, for example, and you decide that you don't want my chain to do as well as yours. You can gather a bunch of people and you guys can give me a bunch of red tokens and it would make my rating go down. Like, how do we combat a situation or a scenario like that, given everything that you just explained?
Yeah, you mean like collusion or like the
Yeah,
51% attack on Bitcoin, that
correct,
kind of thing, right?
correct. Collusion and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And yeah.
I think when you have a completely open and public um, ecosystem that runs this, it's not just on a project by project basis. Like it has to be a foundation pushing this on an ecosystem,
Mm.
and it has to be run through a foundation, not through, a project that's in sort of the Klaytn ecosystem, for example. When that happens, I think there's less motivation unless you're bored to try and take down somebody. And even to try and take down somebody, you're going to go up against the whole population of that ecosystem, right? So let me explain what I'm trying to say there. When you think about the 51% attack, right? There's a certain amount of um, there's only a certain number of miners. And so the collusion becomes much easier. But Noah, in this particular case, when you have literally millions and millions of users in an ecosystem, or let's say millions and millions of users on Facebook, it's a lot harder to collude with people that you don't know. And even if you tried, I think there would be a counterbalance.
Mm.
And so I agree with you. Can you prove this? I don't know. It's all theoretical at this standpoint. I think the conversation is important, though, to start in terms of how do we get to the nirvana state of decentralized societies. Um, is this the right solution? I don't know, but I think it's one idea of many. Again, Vitalik has been talking about soulbound tokens, and I'm sure there will be better ideas that evolve, but I think it's really important to start the conversation, to start really thinking about, how we can get there and what, bringing other people to the table in terms of developers or even philosophers who might have some view in this, and to try and come up with a solution that could work. Because let's face it, the environment that we're in today is not getting any better, it's getting more toxic. And I think at some stage, that has to get managed, but it really can't be managed with one central player doing it.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that sentiment. And for our audience members that are curious to learn more about decentralized societies and even soul-bound tokens, what are some useful resources that we can find online to start learning?
Vitalik co-wrote a paper that anyone can read. I mean I read it. It's if you Google Vitalik and Soul Bound tokens, SOUL bound, BOUND tokens, you'll find the paper that he co-wrote. It's written well. Vitalik has a knack for that, as we all know. Um, I'm not sure, again, implementation wise, whether it will work, which is why I've been kind of thinking about this idea of, what I call the soccer system. Like if you think about how referees police people on the field, right? They use yellow card, they use red cards, and it really does kind of incentivize or decentivize behavior. And it does it in a way where I think it allows the game to continue without sort of abrupt, unnecessary events occurring. So, really, it's about what we think can work as a community, a crypto community as a large, and continuing this conversation, evolving this conversation. We're only at the genesis of it. But the concept of a decentralized society, I really, from my perspective, I would love to get there sooner rather than later.
Hmm. This example that you gave with the green, yellow, and red tokens, I would be curious to know well, you gave us an example of a use case for these reputation tokens. Um, do you see any type of resistance that decentralized governance societies would face from the federal government or federal governments?
I don't think so because it's really just tied to behavior, right? I mean, it's not tied to financial speculation. It's not tied to like you can't really scam with these tokens because there's no financial value. Um, so, I think if anything, especially I can tell you just again, I was mentioning earlier that I've had these discussions with thought leadership groups, including academia. Some of the, Ivy League schools have brought me in to have discussions about this. I can tell you there's a great deal of interest in the traditional world in how to um, control some of the behavior online because it has real world impacts, whether it's bullying, suicide, or just real negative emotional impacts. Their depression, for instance, it has real impacts. And I think, smart people out there, whether they're in crypto or elsewhere, are always looking to try and solve these problems if they can with technology, right? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, the short answer is I don't think that they would press down on this one pretty hard, is my view.
Hmm.
I think they would rather sit back with some popcorn and see how the experiment evolves.
Hmm. David, you've been pretty vocal about why you believe this early on that there is a need for reputation tokens, and you've given us some great examples. Mm, More curious to know now if there are any countries, states who are already adopting a digital reputation system and a decentralized governance framework.
Not that I'm aware of, but in a centralized format, China's doing it. I think we all have read about their,
Social credit
social
system.
credit. Correct. So again, that to me, that's just their version of what Facebook does today, which is censor the crap out of people if they don't like what they're hearing, or if they have a lobbyist pushing them to censor people, right? So this is not just for monitoring and incentivizing or decentivizing bad behavior or good behavior. It's also a way for almost people to have a social vote, right? or an opinion that enables them to put a stamp on something. I think that in itself, at the rudimentary form, is pretty powerful.
Mhm.
And it gives people a voice more than, just having written some sort of comment about something. Because reality is like showing a thumbs up to me or a thumbs down has at times a bigger impact than writing, two sentences on why you like something or don't like something. And really, that stamp of approval or disapproval it's the core of the idea, right? It's taking the thumbs up and thumbs down idea of what we have in social media today and tokenizing the thumbs up and the thumbs down.
I think we can both agree on the fact that internet toxicity, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, is getting worse and worse by the year. And I think that what you proposed here could be you know, could be at least an interesting solution for us to explore down the line as a global community. So, by the way, thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think a lot of our audience members are hearing about these topics for the first time. Things like reputation tokens to me are very new, and I kind of like the idea that you presented, or rather, the way that you presented it to us.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, for me, it's not really trying to find a right or wrong answer, as you alluded to. It's about how can we get the conversation moving? How can we get people more aware of opportunities and solving some of these problems by using Web3 tools? And that's why I'm always, I think Vitalik is fascinating. He's always thinking ahead of, and
Mhm.
he's got this sort of ethos and altruistic, side of him. And that's something I share. I've never in the 10 years in crypto have been in it for the money. It's always been about the technology being fascinating, right? And how we can use the technology to really solve problems in the Web2 world or the traditional world. So appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, happy to, for people who are more interested, like I said, I think if you Google Vitalik's paper, that's a good place to start. I think that at least from the conferences that I was at over the last 3 weeks, I think decentralized societies. This is going to be a topic that comes up more and more. So there'll be much more material, I think, going forward on this stuff for people to read.
Mhm. Um, David, I know that we're short on time. I'm likely not going to be able to get through all my questions, so I'm going to try to keep it high level best I can. Earlier, you talked about, well, you talked about one of our audience members messaged me privately and made a joke about, or one of my team members made a joke about you comparing Axie Infinity to Tetris. But you basically talked about how when a crypto game becomes much more advanced, right? You move from Axie Infinity to World of Warcraft, for example. You're going to need a lot more power, for lack of a better term. And you were describing Klaytn's hub and spoke model, and kind of how it works as a scaling solution to maintain performance as the ecosystem grows. Um, are spokes, aka service chains, meant to handle individual dApps similarly to either Avalanche's subnets or Polkadot's parachains?
Sort of, yeah, kind of, but not exactly. And I would leave it probably for the engineering guys to talk more into the details of why technically it'd be different, but the
Mhm.
idea and the philosophy are similar. Um, and really for us, yeah, I mean, we prefer the larger gaming studios that we work with, and I named a few, to be more on the service chains than to build directly into Klaytn, primarily for the scale reasons, as you alluded to. But also from a marketing perspective, it gives them the ability to kind of market, their own chain, so to speak, right? So they're operating a layer two. It's kind of like Polygon, operating a layer two and doing the marketing to say we are Polygon, not we are a layer two on Ethereum, right? So it gives them a stronger narrative for them to kind of push their own infrastructure. And we just provide support for that infrastructure, but also in order for us to not crash our network, we feel like this is the best way to set up the architecture so that we can scale. Because we do have obviously projects that are other projects that are building directly into Klaytn that are non-gaming projects. So and some gaming as well. But we like the way that we've designed it so far, and it seems to be working in terms of us being probably the only blockchain right now having real AAA games built either on side chain or directly into Klaytn, running and active, and we've had zero outages, zero problems on downtime. And when you look at games like Nino Kuni, Kune, you'll see the quality and the complexity of these games. And when you play it, when you download it on the Apple Store and you play it or Google, you wouldn't even you couldn't realize this is integrated into a service chain. Um, so, we're trying to make games a lot more like real games and not have users or game players feel the friction of blockchain games. And that's why we need to make sure we can scale. We need to make sure that whatever resource demand is being put onto our core network, that we can handle that. And at this stage, the best way to handle that is to try and push a lot of our larger gaming companies to build on our service chains.
You mentioned the Nino Kuni game as one of the ways Klaytn's layer 2 solutions are being implemented. What are some other big AAA games that are not just being built, but even live right now on Klaytn that have user bases, are being played? There are ways to earn crypto, or if not, they're just ways to kind of enjoy a great video game.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily completely think that play to earn is going to dominate the gaming industry for GameFi.
Hmm.
We think people just play good games because they're good games. And eventually, when we start integrating NFTs as in-game cosmetics, those will be the assets that people will want to play for rather
Yes.
than tokenomics. So, and we really strongly believe in that thesis. So just to put that out there. But in terms of play to earn games, we still do have them. We have We Made, which is a listed Korean gaming company. They're quite big. They have some games as a service chain as well. The most popular one is called Mirror 4, MIR4. So your audience can Google that and take a look. Again, the quality of the game compared to Axie Infinity, and you'll know why I made that comment. We have Neowits that have built a golf game um, on our chain. So there's a whole bunch of different. Again, if you want the full list, because my memory is horrible these days. If you go to our website, there is an ecosystem map, and you can take a look at all the different games from all the big gaming companies that are on our ecosystem.
Certainly. David, I pretty much agree. I think that these one skins, weapons, and acolytes that you would see, and let's say in a popular MMORPG like World of Warcraft, um, become backed by NFTs, and players are kind of competing for those and collecting those. That'll be the real bread and butter of play to earn, I guess you can call it, if you want to call it that. And I think that the tokens will be more like gold in World of Warcraft. That's kind of my prediction. I don't think that the tokenomics will be entirely useless. I think they'll have their place, but the big enchilada that players will be competing for are the acolytes.
Well, if I was king for the day, Noah, the way that I would reskin this whole model, because play to earn is really it's not sustainable, is I would rather create a community around a good game, give that community NFT rewards, so reward points as NFTs, allow them to accumulate a certain amount that then they can then stake those NFT rewards points to play or to play competitive games. And then through those competitive games, instead of earning tokens, as you said, they're playing for trophies, which are in-game cosmetics. And I think if we can reskin the whole ecology to move in that direction, what will happen is the needle will move from play to earn to compete to earn. And I
Mm.
think that's a much more sustainable model.
I couldn't agree more. And David, with that said, I want to be very cognizant of your time because I know that you have a flight coming up, and I could probably go on with you for another hour. I had plenty of questions, and you have a lot to offer our community. I would love to have you on again sometime in the future, at your convenience. But before you go, is there anything that I haven't asked about or covered that you want to share with our community?
I guess one point is, another area that we're quite big on is entertainment. We think the digitization of content IP is going to be tremendous. And one of the areas where we're watching very carefully is around things like IPFS in terms of storage of data and the scalability around that. We think as we're able to store more data on chain with scalable solutions, we're going to move into a direction where you can actually stream music, for instance, through NFTs on chain. And therefore, that's when we're going to really start being able to disrupt the Spotify's or even eventually the Netflix. And we're still quite far away from that because I think the infrastructure has to be scalable. But once we do get to that point, I think that's when Web3 and decentralization becomes really interesting.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm assuming that's what is meant on your site when I read open source IPFS gateway for gaming, metaverse, NFT data management. It's all very exciting, and I think that it is the future of how we interface with entertainment.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, David, it was my pleasure having you on today. I want you to make that flight, and so we're going to let you go. Anytime you want to come back, as I mentioned before, and do a follow up AMA with Whale Coin Talk, you want to talk about a specific subject. I think our community really enjoyed this, and this was educational for every listener that's on this podium right now.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Noah. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate the time.
It was my pleasure, David. Whale Coin Talk community, thank you again for joining us. Remember that Whale Coin Talk is an educational channel. We do not give financial advice. We are here as a podium for you to learn about various crypto projects and protocols that are being built all around the space. Um, Remember to always do your own research and invest only what you are willing to lose. Thank you again for joining us. That was a Whale Coin Talk special with David from Klaytn, the Klaytn Foundation. And we will have another AMA for you guys shortly here in a few hours. So stay tuned. This is Noah signing off. Thank you again. Bye bye.